Okay, let's start the second chapter of the course. And we're going to talk about three things in this chapter. They are pattern, process, and scale. These are three very fundamental but very important um, concepts in modeling and simulation. So we're going to make clear of them before we can start to build building block models. Okay. So first concept here, pattern or patterns. The discernible outcomes or signatures of the processes operating in a given system. Okay, so according to this definition, patterns, they are results of processes. And here is an example of of spatial pattern to that. So we have red dots and blue dots in this space, in this square space. And when you're looking at it, you can tell that there is some kind of pattern here because obviously these dots with different colors, they are not mixing, or with, to be more accurate, they don't look like randomly mixed in this space. There are clusters of blue dots and there are clusters of red dots, right? Meanwhile, since there are clusters, there is aggregation, there is also simultaneously segregation, right? Red dots and blue dots, in general, they are not mixed together, right? They are not mixed together. So here is an example of spatial pattern. Discernible outcomes or signatures. The signatures, this word is pretty important. Something special, something can differentiate from others, right? That's the signature. So here we can say that for this specific example, the pattern is not random here. You should know that randomness or random is a pattern, but here the pattern is not random, right? So this is special pattern. And pattern can help identify likely candidate processes, which means that when we're looking at a specific pattern, like I said, it's a result of specific processes. So it could be the result of multiple processes, which means multiple processes, they could lead to the same pattern. Okay, so if we are looking at a pattern, we can list potential candidate processes that led to this pattern. Pattern can also eliminate unlikely candidates. Since we can make a list of candidates, it means that some processes that are not likely to produce this pattern have been eliminated from this list, right? So pattern can help identify and eliminate candidates, but pattern cannot isolate the processes responsible, necessarily isolate the processes responsible. It means that, okay, we can only make this list, but it's more difficult, or you need to do more work to find out the processes are actually responsible for this pattern. That list is just a list of candidates, but who among these candidates are responsible for this pattern? In other words, which processes on this list of candidates actually led to this pattern? You're not sure about that. You need to do more work. So the relationship between a pattern or patterns and processes is tricky. Okay. So let's just talk more. What is a pattern? Regularities we observe in nature, widely observable tendencies. This is from a literature of Lawton from 1999. So beyond that, what is spatial pattern? Because this course is about simulation and modeling in GIS, and GIS is a part of geography. And when we're talking about geography, spatial context is a must. It's something differentiates geography from other disciplines. So space here is important. So specifically, we have spatial patterns. So spatial arrangement of objects given by their spacing in relation to each other. Okay, these objects could be points, could be lines, could be areas. For example, here is a spatial distribution of US public libraries around the country, right? So here we have a spatial context because we're looking at a map showing all states in the United States, right? So this map is a spatial context. So beyond that, we have locations of public libraries in different states in US. So here we have the spatial context and we have an entity. Each entity here is a point. And the meaning of each point is public library, right? So here, can you say a spatial pattern here, right? It's not hard to find out that on the east side of the country, there are more libraries. On the west side of the country, less libraries. And you can say on the east side of the country, most libraries, they are clustered in big cities, around big cities. For example, here, Chicago metropolitan area, Detroit, right? New York, Boston, and capital, Washington, D.C., they are here, right? In Texas, we have a small cluster here and a cluster here. I'm not sure which is which, but I think they are Dallas and Houston. On the left side, it's similar. Although there are less libraries here, public libraries here, but you can see here, in the northern part of California, this area is Bay Area, San Francisco. To the south of the state of California, we have LA, right? So obviously, we can tell there is spatial pattern here about the distribution of U.S. public libraries here, right? So here is an example showing the spatial pattern of a geographic entity. This entity here is public library, okay? And we know there is spatial pattern, and beyond that, we want to create some baseline to differentiate different types of spatial patterns. So this null models, null means empty, right? Or you can say neutral. They are recognized to create a baseline, or you can say each one is a baseline, so baselines, or a benchmark. Expected null models, their expected pattern given prior assumptions. So a benchmark for model evaluation. So when we create these null models, and there is a spatial pattern, we compare this spatial pattern with these null models to say which null model is. Let's put it this way: is this model closer to any of these null models? Right? If it is very close to one of the null models, we can say that this model is following the spatial pattern of this null model that it is close to, okay? Does the model generate different panels than null? That's another thing. If a model is not close to any of these null models, right? Obviously, it's different. Okay, so here we have several null models here. The first here is called clustered. All dots, they are right here in the center of the space. They're closely they're closely, what can I say? They're closely clustered, right? Because this pattern is called clustered. So the second one is called normal. Is called normal. There is a cluster here, right, in the center of the space, because obviously we have huge empty space closer to the boundary of this space, of this space, of this spatial context. But they're not, I mean, all those dots, they are not as close as the first null model. Okay, they are radiating from the center of the space. So this is called normal. This is called normal pattern. The third one is called random. Random, I think, is relatively easy to understand because there is no cluster at all. All dots, they look separately distributed within the space. There is no obvious clustering, right? Maybe here you can see that, okay, there is a clustering here, but a very limited number of dots they're getting together. Here is another cluster, but when you're looking at the whole space, there is no specific area that is empty, or there is no specific area that is full of dots. So this is called random. And then the last one is called regular. This is a null model that is very special because obviously these dots, they have been arranged by some people or by some phenomena, because the spacing among them stays the same. Obviously, some phenomena, or more like some people, made them like this. Okay, so this is called regular. So if you have a spatial pattern, if you have another model for spatial pattern, and it is very close to clustered, or it looks like normal model, so that's possible. Or you could have more likely you could have a spatial pattern that does not look like any of them. It could be somewhere between clustered and normal, could be somewhere between normal and random. It doesn't matter. So because when we are talking about simulation, we're facing the real world, we're trying to simulate the real world phenomena. It's very likely that your result pattern does not look like any of them, but it's fine. Like I mentioned before, they are trying to create a benchmark, okay? Create 4 categories for null models, okay? Not 4 null models, as null models, okay? And the next one is special. It's also a null model. It's called CSR. It's pretty important to this course. I'm going to discuss it later, but here I just want to mention the concept. It's called complete spatial randomness, or we can simply call it CSR. In this pattern, events are independently and uniformly distributed over space. Okay, independently and uniformly. These two words, they are crucial to the definition of this null model. Okay, for now, just remember them. Later, I will discuss it in detail. But you should know that no matter this 4 traditional, or you can say 4 widely used null models or CSR, they're just too simple, right? Which means they are just too, what can I say? They're benchmark, which means that they are not likely to be found in real world, right? Because they are just too perfectly clustered. Or we cannot say perfectly normal, but we can say perfectly random, right? There is no empty space here. Or perfectly regular, right? In real world, when you find out a spatial pattern, it's somewhere between them. Okay, it's not likely that there are a lot of geographic entities they're following regular spatial pattern or purely clustered spatial pattern here. Okay. Okay, and the patterns, they could be tricky sometimes because when you're looking at the same geographic entity from different perspectives, you could have different results for spatial patterns or simply patterns. Here is an example. So we have 4 patterns here, but they're about the same area in the real world. Figure A is reality. It's a 30-meter by 30-meter plot in a high-density shrubland in Western Australia, containing more than 100 species and more than 12,000 individual plants. Okay, so this is the picture. This is the photo of that 30-meter by 30-meter shrubland. Okay, so is there any pattern here when you're looking at this photo? Hardly, right? You only say a lot of plants there. And the B is the spatial distribution of all individuals within this space. If you compare B with 4 null models I introduced here, which one is closer to this actual spatial pattern of all these plant individuals? I would say random. I would say random, right? Let me go back. Because although we can say here, maybe we can say denser plants, they're clustered here because it's black, this area. And maybe some clusters here. But when we're looking at the whole picture, I would say random, right? Do you think there is any other better null model to describe the spatial pattern here? I would say random. But things could be different when you're looking at these individuals from another perspective. Say, figure C here. It's a scatter plot between rank and the proportional abundance of different species. Okay, say the relative abundance of each species in rank order, the species abundance distribution. What does it mean? It means that, okay, we have how many? 100 species, right? And for each species, we can count the number of individual for that species, right? Although it's hard, but we can do that. We can do that. So, for example, species A, there is 2,000 individuals in this picture. Species B, there is 5,000 individuals in this picture, and there is 100 species, and we can count the individuals, the number of individuals for all 100 species, and we rank them by the number of individuals, right? We rank all species by the number of their individuals. So there is the first place, the second place, the third place, and there is the 100th place. Right? Obviously, right here, there is more than 100, right? Containing more than 100 species. But you should know that the horizontal axis is for the rank. Ranked by what? By the number of individuals. So is there a pattern here? Is this still random? Obviously, it's not. Because we can say that only several species, maybe 3 species, they have a proportional abundance larger than 0.06, right? It means that what is the meaning of proportional abundance? If the total population is 100, and for species A, there is only 1 individual, it means that the proportional abundance for species A is 1% or 0.01. If species B has a population of 2 and the total population is 100, then what's the proportional abundance for species B? Is 0.02. That's the meaning for vertical axis. So what does it mean? It means that there are several dominant species here. Only 3 of them among more than 100 species have a proportional abundance equal or larger than 0.06. The rest species, they exist within this area, but most of them, they have a proportional abundance smaller than 0.02, which is 2%. What does it mean? It means that here in this picture, although it looks random, but when we're talking about the population of each species here, we have several dominant species. They are dominating this area in terms of the population. The rest of species, they are small clusters. Each species has a specific proportional abundance smaller than 0.02, because in figure C, in plot C, each dot is representing a species. Okay, so here we have a pattern. It's not random anymore. Okay, it's not more than 100 species. They equally share this space. No, there are several dominant species here. So for D, figure D is a frequency histogram of the distances from individuals to their nearest neighbors. What does it mean, nearest neighbor? You can randomly choose an individual plant within this space, no matter the species. Species doesn't matter here, okay? Choose a dot here and find out its nearest neighbor and measure the distance between this randomly picked point or randomly picked individual and its nearest neighbor. That's the distance between between an individual and its nearest neighbor. Okay, it's easy to understand, right? So if you do this for all individuals within this space, you have a huge amount of measurements. Each one is a distance between an individual and its nearest neighbor, right? So, and you put the data in this histogram, okay? Horizontal axis is for the distance. It's from 0 to 0.1 meters to 0.5 meter. And the frequency here is the number of measurements that fall into this range. For example, let's say this the longest bar. This bar varies from 0.1 to 0.15 because this is a midpoint between 0.1 and 0.2. So this bar has the longest length. It means that most distance, they fall into the range of, between 0.1 to 0.15. What does it mean? It means that there is a pattern here. There is a pattern here in terms of the distance between an individual plant and its nearest neighbor. Most measurements for this nearest distance is somewhere between 0.1 and 0.15. And this distance is not too short because we have shorter candidates, right? We have shorter elements, or we can say we have shorter measurements. We have longer measurements, but it looks like that the distribution of this distance measurement is following a normal distribution. Most distance measurements, they're not too long, they're not too short. It's somewhere between 0.1 to 0.15. Okay, this is also a pattern, and it has something to do with space because we're talking about distance. Since distance is related to the positions of two individuals. So patterns can be tricky. Like I said, if you are looking at this picture, there is no pattern. At least you cannot find a pattern with your eyes. Secondly, when we're plotting, when we're mapping all individuals within this space, there is a pattern. This pattern is called random, right? And when we're talking about the relationship when we're ranking different species by their population, there is also pattern. We have dominant species here, but you should know that this time it has nothing to do with space, because we're talking about population. It's not population density, right? And the last analysis here, also it is related to space, because we're talking about distance, the distance between each individual and its nearest neighbor, right? So here again, we have pattern, okay? So be careful with pattern. Okay, this is a good lesson telling you that when you are looking at, when you are doing analysis, carrying out analysis for the same research object, this 30 by 30 meter shrubland, when you're using different methods, when you're looking at the same object, research object from different perspectives, your results about pattern could change. Okay, so this is the first video for chapter 2. Thank you.